a black cloak, a glint of steel curved like the moon, a face that is not a face at all, only bone-hollow eyes staring from beneath the hood. We call him the Grim Reaper, the ferryman of souls, the shadow that waits at every bedside. He has become so familiar that we no longer question him. Children draw him in chalk. Artists carve him into stone. Even the living joke about him, as though death could ever be a laughing matter. But here is the truth, whispered in hushed corners. The Grim Reaper does not exist in the Bible. No prophet speaks his name. No ancient scripture calls him forth. He appears suddenly centuries later, like a phantom, stepping onto a stage that was never his. Why? Because behind that skull mask, behind the cloak, stitched from plague and fear, hides something older. Gods of death, who once ruled the threshold between worlds. Gods who demanded offerings, who carried ropes, staffs, and blades to cut the bond between flesh and spirit. They were too frightening to survive, unmasked, too sacred, too dangerous. And so in time, they were hidden beneath a costume. We could endure a skeleton with a scythe. What if the Reaper is not a creation of our imagination, but a disguise carefully crafted to keep older powers alive? What if every time we whisper his name, we are calling not to death itself, but to the forgotten gods who still wait behind the mask? When the Black Death swept across Europe in the 14th century, whole towns turned into graveyards overnight. Streets that once echoed with song fell silent, but for the tolling of bells. Priests walked with incense, unable to keep pace with the dying. And in the imagination of a terrified people, death was given a face. He appeared first in woodcuts, crude but powerful. A gaunt figure cloaked in darkness, swinging a scythe through fields of the living as though they were no different from stalks of grain. The image spread faster than the plague itself, etched into walls, carved into church pews, whispered in songs that no one dared sing too loudly. But the story does not begin there. Long before medieval Europe, there were other messengers of death. Among the Celts, folklore spoke of a rider, cloaked in black, a shadow horseman who crossed the hills
let us remember
at dusk.
the teachings and
To meet
live
his gaze
righteously.
was to know your days were numbered. In northern myth, the Draugr restless dead sometimes appeared with weapons of harvest, their purpose not to reap crops, but to reap lives. And in the Catholic rituals of later centuries, the image of the skeletal reaper was woven seamlessly into sermons, as though it had always been there. Yet no scripture had given him birth. No saint had described him. The figure was a mask drawn from fragments of much older fears. Look deeper into the dance macabre, the dance of death painted on monastery walls. Skeletons leading kings, merchants, peasants, and nuns into one endless procession. A reminder that death spares no one. But also, if you look closely, an echo of ancient rituals where the living danced alongside effigies of the dead, blurring the line between body and spirit. Was it warning, or was it worship? Even the scythe itself whispers of origins far older than the plague. It is not a soldier's weapon, nor a hunter's tool. It belongs to the field, to the harvest. To reap is to cut life at its root, to take what the earth has ripened. In this symbol lies an unsettling truth. Perhaps the reaper is not killing at all, but harvesting souls, gathering them, the way humanity once gathered wheat. In Spain, paintings of the Segador de Almas, the soul reaper, showed him less as a monster, more as a laborer of the afterlife, stooped and weary from endless work. In parts of Germany, he was imagined as a thin farmer in gray, faceless, but relentless crossing fields by moonlight. Everywhere, the figure blurred the line between myth and memory. And so as Europe healed from plague and famine, the figure of the Grim Reaper remained. He was etched into our imagination, but not as something new. Rather, he was the echo of something much older, something reshaped. Beneath the hooded cloak, the mask of bone, lay the shadows of forgotten gods, gods of harvest, of cycles of endings that were not endings at all. The question lingers, did we invent the Grim Reaper to explain our fear? Or did we inherit him, passed down from temples, turned to dust, a relic of divine faces too terrible to remember, too sacred to erase? The hooded skeleton with a scythe feels uniquely European. And yet, when we look beyond the borders of Christendom, we find his shadow everywhere, never called Grim Reaper, yet carrying the same ancient weight. In Greece, the people spoke of Thanatos. He was no monster, no demon of terror, but a quiet hand, a god with wings of shadow, gentle in his touch, whose task was to guide the soul into the underworld. But artists often painted him with an inverted torch or a sword, symbols of extinguished life, of cutting the final thread. He was not feared so much as respected. For the Greeks understood that death did not roar. It whispered, travel further east, and in the Vedas of India, we meet Yama, Lord of Death. Dark-skinned, crowned, riding a buffalo across the threshold of worlds. In his hand, not a scythe, but a noose with which he snared the soul and pulled it free from the body. He was judge and shepherd, both deciding where each spirit would go. The noose, like the scythe, is a tool of separation. One cuts, the other pulls, but both speak of the same act, harvesting the soul from its vessel. Among the Norse, death walked with the Valkyries, maidens of Odin. They chose who would fall in battle, who would rise to feast in Valhalla, and who would sink into hell's cold halls. They were reapers, not of wheat, but of warriors. And when famine came, the Norse spoke of hell herself, half woman, half corpse, presiding over a realm of shadow. If the Grim Reaper wears black, hell wears both flesh and bone, a reminder that death is always both near and far. Across the seas in Mexico, death wears another mask entirely. La Santa Muerte, the Holy Death. A figure robed in brilliant colors, holding not only the scythe, but also globes, scales, and candles. Millions worship her, still leaving offerings of tequila flowers and blood-red roses. To some, she is a saint, to others, a goddess. But her essence is unmistakable. The ancient cycle of death and protection, reborn in modern devotion. She is the Reaper, not as villain, but as protector of the poor, the forgotten, the outcast. And in Egypt, death was guided by Anubis, the jackal-headed god. He did not carry a blade or a scythe, but scales. It was he who weighed the heart against the feather of truth. Yet like the Reaper, he was a threshold figure, the one who met the dead, the one who determined their passage. His long snout and black form stalked the imagination of Egyptians just as the hooded cloak does ours. The same figure appears in different guises, different costumes, sometimes winged, sometimes robed, sometimes skeletal, sometimes bestial. Yet all share a single role to separate the soul from the flesh, to guide it into a realm we cannot see. So perhaps the Grim Reaper is not a European invention at all, but the last mask of a far older archetype. A shadow that moves from Greece to India, from Egypt to Mexico, from Viking sagas to Catholic cathedrals. He is not one figure, but many woven into a tapestry of belief that humanity cannot seem to forget. The question remains, why does every culture imagine death not as an event, but as a person? Why do we give it hands, a face, and a weapon? Perhaps because deep down, we sense that death is not empty space, but a presence. A presence that has always been watching, under different names, under different masks. When archaeologists dig beneath the surface of myth, they often uncover something startling. Symbols we think of as medieval or Christian are carved into stones thousands of years older. The Grim Reaper with his cloak and scythe is no exception. Across Neolithic Europe, archaeologists have found engravings of skeletal figures etched into bone and stone. Some bear tools that look eerily like sickles, implements of both harvest and death. In burial sites, from the Danube to the Iberian Peninsula, small figurines show hooded shapes with hollowed eyes, their faces erased. Were these images of ancestors, shamans, or early guardians of the dead precursors of the Reaper's mask? In Mesopotamia, clay tablets describe the Gala demons, beings who drag souls into the underworld. They are shown carrying hooks and blades, not to kill, but to capture. The act of taking life was imagined as a harvest, the body as stalk, the soul as grain. Archaeologists see in these images a continuity, the tool of the field becoming the weapon of death. Anthropologists studying agrarian societies note the same pattern. In cultures where survival depended on the cycle of planting and reaping, death was understood through the language of harvest. The scythe, the sickle, the knife. These were not only tools of survival, but symbols of mortality. To reap wheat was to mirror the gods who one day would reap you. Even in medieval Europe during the Black Death Mass, graves reveal not only the bones of the dead, but traces of ritual. At some plague cemeteries, archaeologists found coins placed on eye seeds scattered across corpses, and in rare cases, scythes laid beside the buried. Not farming tools, but votive offerings, tokens to the figure who had cut the life away. It is as if the people knew that death was not random disease, but a reaper doing his work. In Central America, excavations of Aztec temples reveal sculptures of Mictlantecutli, the skeletal lord of death. His jaw, agape ribs, exposed. At his feet lay offerings of maize beans and blades. Scholars argue that the pairing of food and death was not symbolic accident. It was deliberate. Death was harvest, harvest was death. The Grim Reaper's scythe, centuries later, was only the European branch of this same root. Modern anthropology calls this the personification of thresholds. Whenever humans confront an unseeable boundary, birth, death, dawn, dusk, we shape it into a figure. Death especially demands embodiment, for it is too vast to comprehend as an idea alone. Archaeology confirms this, from cave paintings to temple carvings, from Bronze Age burials to medieval murals. The figure of death has always been there. Cloaked, skeletal, armed with the tools of separation. So when we speak of the Grim Reaper, we are not speaking of a medieval invention. We are speaking of an archetype carved into the earth for millennia. A mask that changes form but never disappears. The cloak, the skull, the scythe, they are not symbols of fear alone, but the residue of ancient rituals, the language of harvest carried into the grave. And if archaeology whispers true, then the Reaper is older than Scripture, older than plague, older even than civilization itself. He has been with us since the first seeds were sown, waiting patient watching. Symbols survive when names are forgotten. The Grim Reaper is not frightening because of who he is, but because of what he carries, what he wears, what he reveals. Each element is a fragment of memory stitched together across millennia. The cloak comes first. Long black flowing, it hides the body beneath. In every culture, darkness is a veil. The shroud of night, the curtain of the grave, the mystery of the unseen. To cover oneself in black is to step into the invisible, to exist between the world of the living and the dead. The cloak makes the Reaper less a man and more a shadow, a presence without form. Archaeologists compare it to funerary shrouds of ancient burials, cloths that hid the features of the corpse, so the soul could pass unrecognized by the living. Then there is the skull. Bone stripped of flesh, it is the great equalizer. Kings and peasants alike become identical beneath the skin. The skull is not merely a sign of decay, it is a mask of eternity. Long after the flesh is gone, bone remains. To wear a skull face is to wear the proof that all life is bound by the same law. In alchemy and medieval mysticism, the skull was not only memento mori, but also a vessel of transformation, from body into dust, from dust into spirit. And the scythe, perhaps the most haunting symbol of all. Unlike a sword or spear, it is not a weapon of war. It is a farmer's tool curved to gather wheat with one sweeping motion. In the Reaper's hands, it transforms. Each soul is a stalk, each life cut down when ripe. It is both terrifying and comforting. For harvesting is not annihilation. The wheat is gathered, stored, and planted anew. So too, the scythe suggests the soul is not destroyed, only reaped, carried into another field. The hourglass sometimes joins these symbols, sand trickling from one chamber to the other. Time itself becomes a companion of death, inevitable, unstoppable, indifferent. The hourglass whispers that the Reaper does not come early nor late, but exactly when the last grain falls. Even his silence is symbolic. Unlike gods of thunder or demons of fire, the Reaper makes no sound. He does not roar.
The inevitable
He does not cry
passage
out.
of time.
He waits. In that silence lies his true power, an inevitability that needs no voice. Taken together, these symbols do more than frighten. They remind. The cloak teaches that all is hidden in shadow. The skull teaches that all are equal in death. The scythe teaches that endings are also harvests. The hourglass teaches that all things flow toward their close. The Reaper's symbols are not decorations. They are the language of mortality, the alphabet of endings. And behind them, perhaps still lingers the memory of older gods. Gods who taught humanity to see death not as chaos, but as the final, inevitable rhythm of life. If death is inevitable, then why do we insist on giving it a face? Why cloak it in bone and shadow? Why place a scythe in its hand? Perhaps because the void is unbearable. To imagine death as nothing is to fall into silence without end. But to imagine death as someone who comes, who gathers, who guides, gives us a way to face the abyss. The Grim Reaper, then, is not only a terror, he is also a mirror. His scythe reflects the sickle we hold in the fields. His cloak reflects the shrouds in which we bury our dead. His skull reflects the bone beneath our own skin. In him, we see ourselves. He is not an intruder into life, but its conclusion, the final chapter written in the same ink as the first. Philosophers have long whispered that death gives life its shape. Without the boundary, there is no urgency, no meaning. A harvest is only valuable because it is gathered at the right season. A life is only precious because it ends. The Reaper reminds us that we do not own our days, they are lent to us, and every grain of sand that falls in his hourglass is both a loss and a gift. And yet there is something more unsettling. If the Reaper is a mask hiding the faces of older gods, then perhaps humanity has not conquered its fear at all, merely tamed it, softened it, given it a costume we can endure. Behind the hood may still linger Yama Thanatos, Hell Mictlantecuhtli, the ancient arbiters of souls who once demanded worship and sacrifice. What does it mean, then, that we still bow to their shadow, even if we call it by a new name? To see the Grim Reaper not as an enemy, but as a custodian changes everything. He is not there to destroy, but to gather. Not there to rob, but to return. Death is not the end of meaning. It is the horizon that makes meaning possible. The cloak of darkness does not hide chaos, but order the order of cycles of harvests, of beginnings that require endings. Perhaps the deepest truth is this: the Grim Reaper is not a stranger. He is the most faithful companion we have, walking beside us from the moment of birth, patient, silent waiting. He is the shadow that gives light its brilliance, the silence that gives song its beauty, the ending that gives life its urgency. To fear him is natural, but to understand him is to recognize that we live not in spite of death, but because of it. Without the Reaper, life itself would have no shape, only endless, formless time. So what then is the Grim Reaper? A medieval phantom born of plague and famine, or a mask stitched from shadows to conceal the faces of gods too ancient, too terrifying to name? If he is only a symbol, why does every culture summon him under a different guise? Thanatos, Yama, Anubis, La Santa Muerte, yet always with the same task. If he is merely imagination, why do his tools mirror those found in ancient tombs, carved into stone, buried with the dead? Perhaps we have not invented him at all. Perhaps we have only remembered him again and again, each time the harvest ends, each time a loved one is lowered into the ground, each time we dream of footsteps in the dark. And if the Grim Reaper is not a person, but a mask, then who wears it? What power still waits behind the hollow skull, behind the cloak of silence? One day, we will each meet him, The question is not if, but who truly comes to take our hand. And if death itself is only a disguise, what other faces, what other gods still hide behind the masks we think we know?